Picture this. You're shaking hands with your ancestor from 10,000 years ago. Their palm meets yours, and immediately you notice something startling. Their grip is uncomfortably powerful, almost crushing. The bones in their hand feel denser, heavier. The muscles in their forearm are thick, pronounced in ways yours aren't. This isn't your imagination. And it's not just about them being tougher or more hardened by their lifestyle. Here's the thing, if you could arm wrestle a Neanderthal woman, you'd lose. Badly. Studies of Neanderthal remains show they had 30 to 40% more muscle mass than modern humans. Their bones reveal muscle attachment points far larger than anything we see today. The average prehistoric human had bone density 20 to 40% higher than ours. Think about that for a moment. A woman who lived 40,000 years ago could physically overpower most male athletes today. And here's where it gets interesting. This isn't a story about evolution making us weaker over time. Evolution doesn't work backward like that. Something else happened. Something far more revealing about what it means to be human. Analysis of 7,000-year-old European farmers shows bone strength equivalent to modern cross-country runners. These were people who worked the land, who walked everywhere, whose daily lives demanded constant physical effort. By contrast, the average modern human has bone strength similar to sedentary populations. We're not comparing ancient hunters to modern athletes. We're comparing ancient ordinary people to modern ordinary people, and they were remarkably, profoundly stronger. The evidence is written in the bones themselves, in the thickness of femurs, in the density of vertebrae, in the pronounced ridges where muscles once attached with a grip we can barely imagine. But why? What happened between then and now? What invisible bargain did we strike that traded raw physical power for something else? And what does this transformation reveal about the hidden costs of the world we've built? Before we explore this mystery together, a quick word about this community. Whether you're watching from Tokyo as the sun rises, London over lunch, or Los Angeles in the deep quiet of midnight, you're part of something quietly remarkable. A global community of curious minds exploring history together in the stillness of late hours. If you'd like to be part of this, drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. There's something grounding about knowing we're scattered across the planet, all wondering about the same mysteries. And if these long explorations into forgotten history resonate with you, consider subscribing. No pressure, just an invitation to join us for future journeys. Now, let's travel back in time to understand what made our ancestors so remarkably strong. Your bones are keeping a diary. Right now, as you lie there listening, they're recording everything. The pressure of your head against the pillow, the weight of your body against the mattress, every step you took today, every object you lifted, every moment of stillness. Your skeleton is a living archive, constantly rewriting itself based on how you use it. This isn't metaphor, it's biology. In 1892, a German anatomist named Julius Wolff published something remarkable. He'd spent years studying how bones heal after fractures, and he noticed a pattern. Bones don't just knit themselves back together randomly, they rebuild along the exact lines of mechanical stress. Where pressure is greatest, bone grows denser, stronger, thicker. Where stress is absent, bone dissolves away, reabsorbed by the body as unnecessary weight. Wolff's law, as it came to be known, revealed something profound about the human skeleton. It's not fixed at birth like a building's frame. It's adaptive, responsive, constantly negotiating with the forces acting upon it. Your bones are literally shaped by your life. Think about what that means. The femur of a marathon runner looks different under X-ray than the femur of someone who drives everywhere. The spine of a construction worker carries visible evidence of their labor. The arm bones of a tennis player show asymmetry, the dominant arm noticeably denser than the other. Bone responds to mechanical loading within weeks. Stop using it, and it begins to fade within months. This is why astronauts lose bone density in space. Without gravity's constant pressure, their skeletons begin to dissolve. It's why elderly people confined to bed rest see their bones weaken so rapidly. The body is ruthlessly efficient. It won't maintain what it doesn't need. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If bones are living records of physical activity, then ancient bones are archives of ancient lives. Every skeleton excavated from the earth carries within it a detailed account of how that person moved through their world. How much they walked, how much they lifted, how much force their bodies regularly encountered. And when researchers began examining these ancient archives, they found something they weren't expecting. Picture a laboratory at Cambridge University in 2014. A team of researchers is analyzing femurs, tibias, and fibulas from archaeological sites across Europe and North America. They're using a technique called computed tomography scanning to measure the internal structure of these bones. Not just the outer diameter, but the thickness of the cortical bone, the dense outer shell that gives the skeleton its strength. They're comparing bones across 7,000 years of human history. Hunter-gatherers, early farmers, medieval peasants, modern humans. The pattern that emerges is striking. The leg bones of mobile hunter-gatherers show cortical thickness comparable to modern semi-professional athletes. These are people who walk 10 to 15 miles a day as a matter of course. People who ran down prey animals over hours-long pursuits. People whose lives demanded constant movement across varied terrain. Then agriculture arrives, and within just a few generations, bone strength begins to decline. Not dramatically at first. Early farmers still worked the land with hand tools. They still walked everywhere. They still lived physically demanding lives by modern standards. But the decline continues. Century after century, millimeter by millimeter, human leg bone strength decreases. By the time you reach modern sedentary populations, the difference is stark. The 2014 Cambridge study found that human leg bone strength has declined about 15% since the advent of agriculture. 15%. Consider that for a moment. We're not talking about a subtle shift. We're talking about a measurable, quantifiable reduction in the structural integrity of the human skeleton. But that's just the beginning. When researchers examine Neanderthal remains, the differences become even more pronounced. Neanderthal arm bones show bending strength 2 to 3 times greater than modern humans. Not modern sedentary humans. Modern humans in general. Including athletes. Including people who work physically demanding jobs. The upper arm bone of a Neanderthal, the humerus, is so robust that it looks almost comically thick compared to ours. The shaft is wider. The walls are denser. The whole structure is engineered for forces we rarely encounter anymore. And here's what's really fascinating. This isn't just about bone thickness. It's about something called antheses, the points where muscles and tendons attach to bone. When a muscle pulls repeatedly on bone, the attachment point becomes pronounced, raised, rough. The bone builds up extra material to handle the stress. It's like calluses on your hands but on your skeleton. Ancient human skeletons show antheses that modern anatomists describe with words like massive, and pronounced, and remarkably developed. The deltoid tuberosity, where the shoulder muscle attaches to the upper arm, often looks like a raised ridge. The gluteal tuberosity, where the buttocks muscles attach to the femur, can be so prominent it's visible to the naked eye. These aren't anomalies. These are ancient bodybuilders. These are ordinary people. Children, women, elderly individuals. The archaeological record shows that robust antheses were the norm, not the exception. What were they doing? What kind of daily activities create this level of muscular development? The answer is written in the details. Analysis of upper arm bones often shows asymmetry. The right arm, or sometimes the left, is noticeably more robust than the other. This suggests repetitive, forceful actions. Throwing spears, grinding grain, chopping wood, digging. The kind of activities that load one arm more heavily than the other. But it's the leg bones that tell the most comprehensive story. Because walking, running, jumping, climbing, these are symmetrical activities. And ancient leg bones show uniformly robust development. Both legs equally strong. Both femurs equally dense. This suggests something remarkable. These weren't people who occasionally engaged in strenuous activity. These were people whose baseline existence demanded constant physical output. Their bodies were adapted to movement the way ours are adapted to sitting. Let's go back further. Much further. In 1993, archaeologists working at Boxgrove in southern England uncovered something extraordinary. A tibia, a shin bone, from a human ancestor who lived approximately 500,000 years ago. This individual, now known as Boxgrove Man, predates modern Homo sapiens. This is Homo heidelbergensis, one of our evolutionary predecessors. The tibia was sent to the Natural History Museum in London for analysis. And when researchers examined its density and structure, they found something that should make you pause. The bone density was comparable to modern Olympic athletes. Not comparable to average modern humans. Comparable to people who train intensively, professionally, whose entire lives are structured around pushing their bodies to peak performance. Except Boxgrove Man wasn't training for the Olympics. Boxgrove Man was just living. This was baseline human robustness 500,000 years ago. The story doesn't end there. Throughout the 20th century, anthropologists studied contemporary hunter-gatherer populations before those lifestyles largely disappeared. The Kunsan people of southern Africa, the Hadza of Tanzania, Aboriginal Australians, Arctic peoples. These populations, living in ways that approximated ancient human subsistence patterns, provided a window into our physical heritage. And consistently, across different continents and different environments, these populations showed bone density approximately 20% higher than Western populations. 20%. That's not a small difference. That's the kind of difference that shows up clearly in medical scans. But here's what's troubling. Those studies were conducted primarily in the mid to late 20th century. And already, even then, many of these populations were transitioning away from traditional lifestyles. The people being studied had often grown up with some access to modern tools, modern transportation, modern conveniences, which means the 20% figure might be conservative. The true baseline of human bone density, before any modern influences, might have been even higher. Now let's talk about the timeline. When did this change begin? When did humans start becoming more gracile, less robust, physically weaker? The answer is complicated, because it happened in stages, and the stages varied by population. The first major shift appears around 10 to 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the agricultural revolution in the Fertile Crescent. Skeletal remains from early farming communities show the beginning of the decline. Not dramatic yet, but measurable. Why? Some researchers think it's simply about reduced mobility. Hunter-gatherers walked constantly, covering vast territories. Farmers stayed closer to their fields. Less walking means less mechanical loading on the legs. Others argue it's about diet. Agricultural populations often had less diverse nutrition than hunter-gatherers. Deficiencies in calcium, vitamin D, and protein could affect bone development. Childhood malnutrition leaves permanent marks on the skeleton. But the decline accelerates. By the Bronze Age around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, skeletal robustness has decreased noticeably from hunter-gatherer baselines. By the Roman period, 2,000 years ago, we're seeing skeletons that look more recognizably modern in their gracility. And then comes industrialization. The 19th and 20th centuries see the most rapid decline in human bone strength in our entire evolutionary history. Within just a few generations, mechanical loading on the human skeleton drops precipitously. Machines replace manual labor. Cars replace walking. Elevators replace stairs. A 2015 study compared the leg bones of modern Americans to those of people living in the same region 200 years ago. The difference was stark. Our ancestors, from just 2 centuries ago, had leg bones approximately 12% stronger than ours. 200 years. That's nothing in evolutionary time. That's 8 or 9 generations. Your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents had measurably stronger skeletons than you do. Think about that for a moment. But there's another layer to this story. Because bone strength isn't just about the bone itself. It's about the entire musculoskeletal system. Bones respond to the pull of muscles. Strong muscles create strong bones. The relationship is reciprocal, interconnected. When researchers examine ancient muscle attachment sites, they're not just seeing evidence of denser bones, they're seeing evidence of more powerful muscles. The size and prominence of entheses correlates with muscle mass and strength. A pronounced deltoid tuberosity means the deltoid muscle was large and frequently engaged. A robust gluteal tuberosity means powerful glutes. And here's where modern comparative anatomy becomes illuminating. When researchers study the muscle attachment sites on chimpanzee skeletons, they see similar levels of prominence to those found on ancient human skeletons. Chimpanzees, who spend their lives climbing, brachiating, pulling their body weight constantly, developed the kind of robust entheses that were once normal for humans. We're not chimpanzees, obviously. Our musculature is differently arranged, adapted for different activities. But the comparison is revealing. It suggests that ancient humans were using their muscles with an intensity and frequency that we rarely approach today. Consider the implications. Your skeleton right now is adapted to your life. If you sit most of the day, your bones reflect that. If you walk regularly, your bones reflect that too. If you lift weights, run, climb, your skeleton gradually remodels itself to handle those stresses. But here's the thing. Even the most dedicated modern athlete, training daily, pushing their body to its limits, is unlikely to match the baseline robustness of an average human from 10,000 years ago. Because ancient humans weren't training, they were just living. And their daily existence demanded a level of physical output that we've engineered out of modern life. The archaeological evidence is unambiguous. Femurs from Neolithic Europe show cortical thickness that modern athletes achieve only after years of intensive training. Tibias from Bronze Age sites show bone density that requires deliberate, sustained mechanical loading to develop. And it's not just lower body strength. Upper body robustness was equally pronounced. Analysis of Neolithic shoulder joints shows development consistent with regular overhead lifting of heavy objects. Elbow joints show wear patterns suggesting frequent forceful extension and flexion. Wrist bones show density that modern rock climbers might recognize. Some of the most striking evidence comes from studying ancient children. Because children's bones are still developing, they're especially responsive to mechanical stress. And ancient children's skeletons show robust development from surprisingly young ages. A study of juvenile remains from a Bronze Age site in Britain found that children as young as 5 or 6 showed pronounced muscle attachment sites. These weren't children engaged in formal training. These were children participating in daily life, and daily life was physically demanding enough to shape their developing skeletons. Compare that to modern children. Pediatric bone density has been declining for decades. Studies from multiple countries show the same pattern. Each generation of children has slightly weaker bones than the previous generation. The culprit is obvious. Reduced physical activity, more screen time, less outdoor play, less climbing, running, jumping. The human skeleton evolved over millions of years to handle specific kinds of mechanical stress. Walking long distances, carrying heavy loads, climbing, throwing, digging, pulling, pushing. These activities created the forces that shaped our bones into their characteristic form. And then, very recently in evolutionary terms, we removed most of those forces. We built a world where mechanical stress is optional, where you can live your entire life without ever pushing your body beyond minimal exertion. Your skeleton is adapting to that world, right now, today. As you listen to this, your bones are remodeling themselves to match your activity level. If you're sedentary, they're becoming more graceful, less dense, structurally weaker. Not because something is wrong with you, because your body is efficiently allocating resources. Why maintain bone density you don't need? But here's what the ancient skeletal evidence reveals. We're not just losing unnecessary weight, we're losing a fundamental aspect of human physical capability. The kind of strength that was once universal is now rare. The kind of bone density that was once baseline now requires dedicated effort to achieve. When you shake hands with someone from 10,000 years ago, their crushing grip isn't just impressive. It's diagnostic. It's evidence of a different relationship between humans and physical reality. A relationship where strength wasn't something you pursued at the gym. It was something you couldn't avoid, where robust bones weren't a sign of athletic dedication. They were simply what human bones looked like. The bones tell us that ancient humans were stronger. Measurably, quantifiably, dramatically stronger. The evidence is written in cortical thickness, in enthesis development, in bone density measurements that span hundreds of thousands of years. But bones only tell us that ancient humans were stronger. To understand why, to understand what they were doing that made their bodies so different, we need to examine how they actually lived. We need to look at the daily activities, the survival strategies, the physical demands that created those remarkable skeletons. Because the story of human physical decline isn't really about bones. It's about the invisible bargain we struck when we built civilization. And understanding that bargain means understanding what we gave up and what we gained in return. Picture this. It's 15,000 years ago, and you're waking up in what we now call southern France. No alarm clock jolts you from sleep, but there's also no bed beneath you, no walls around you, no kitchen waiting with breakfast, no refrigerator humming in the corner. You're waking up to a day that will demand everything from your body. Before you've even fully opened your eyes, your muscles are already engaged. You're sleeping on the ground, cushioned perhaps by animal hides and dried grass, and simply standing up requires core strength modern humans rarely use. No mattress to push against, no bed frame to grab. You engage your abdominal muscles, roll to your side, push up with your arms, and rise to your feet in one fluid motion. You've done this every morning of your life. Your children will do it every morning of theirs. The first task is water. The stream is half a kilometer away. You walk there carrying containers made from animal bladders or woven plant fibers. The round trip, which you'll make twice today, is a kilometer of walking. But this isn't walking on a flat sidewalk. This is navigating uneven terrain, stepping over roots and rocks, maintaining balance on slopes. Your feet, unshod or wrapped in simple leather, feel every surface. Your ankles constantly adjust. Your core stabilizes with each step. At the stream, you kneel to fill your containers. Your quadriceps support your full body weight in a deep squat. You hold this position for several minutes. Modern physical therapists would call this mobility work. For you, it's just getting water. Here's the thing. This is the first hour of your day. And already, you've engaged more muscle groups, burned more calories, and challenged your body in more varied ways than many modern humans do in an entire week. The numbers tell a stark story. Hunter-gatherers typically walked 9 to 15 kilometers daily. That's roughly 6 to 9 miles, every single day, regardless of weather, regardless of how you feel, regardless of whether you want to. Compare that to modern humans, who average less than 5 kilometers daily. And that 5 kilometers includes walking from your car to the office, from your couch to the refrigerator, from your desk to the bathroom. We're talking about half the distance. And that's just the beginning of the disparity. Studies of the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania, one of the last populations living a lifestyle similar to our prehistoric ancestors, reveal something profound about daily energy expenditure. Hadza adults expend roughly 2,600 to 2,800 calories daily through physical activity alone. Not total caloric expenditure, which includes your basal metabolic rate. Just the calories burned through movement and activity. Think about that for a moment. The average modern office worker burns perhaps 500 to 800 calories through daily activity. The Hadza are burning 3 to 4 times that amount, every single day. Not through structured exercise, through living. But it's not just the quantity of movement. It's the variety. The constant engagement of different muscle groups in different ways. Let's walk through a typical day and really understand what ancient bodies were doing. After collecting water, you return to camp. There's no breakfast waiting. Food is something you acquire, and acquiring it means work. If you're a woman, today might involve gathering plant foods. This means walking several more kilometers, often while carrying an infant or young child. Ethnographic studies of traditional societies show women routinely carrying loads averaging 70% of their body weight over long distances. 70%. If you weigh 130 pounds, you're carrying 90 pounds while walking miles over rough terrain. Your legs push you forward. Your core stabilizes the load. Your back supports the weight. Your arms maintain balance. Every muscle system is engaged. When you find a productive area, the real work begins. Digging roots requires upper body strength and sustained effort. You're kneeling or squatting, driving a digging stick into hard earth, leveraging your body weight, pulling up resistant roots. Modern farmers using shovels would recognize the effort. But you're doing this with a pointed stick, relying entirely on technique and strength. Gathering nuts means reaching, climbing, stretching. You're moving through three-dimensional space in ways modern humans rarely do. Up into trees, down to ground level, reaching overhead, bending low. Your body constantly adapts to different positions, different challenges. And you're doing this for hours. 4 to 6 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity. Not in a gym with climate control and water breaks. In the heat or cold, with insects, with the constant awareness that predators exist and you are not invincible. Now picture the men's activities. Hunting isn't the Hollywood version of stalking prey for 20 minutes before a dramatic kill. It's often persistence hunting, which means running after an animal for hours until it collapses from exhaustion. Studies of persistence hunting in the Kalahari show hunts lasting 4 to 6 hours, covering 20 to 35 kilometers in intense heat. Your cardiovascular system is pushed to its limits. Your legs burn, your lungs strain, but you can't stop, because stopping means your family doesn't eat. So you keep running. And when the animal finally collapses, you still have to butcher it, which means more squatting, more use of upper body strength, more precise movements with stone tools. Then you have to carry the meat back to camp. A successful hunt might yield 50 to 100 pounds of meat. You're carrying this weight for kilometers. Your shoulders bear the load. Your legs push uphill. Your entire body is a machine for transporting resources. But here's what makes this different from modern exercise. There's no rest day. There's no off-season. There's no "I don't feel like it today." The physical demands are relentless because survival demands are relentless. Making tools is itself a full-body workout. Creating a single stone hand axe requires approximately 30 minutes of precise, forceful percussion. You're sitting or squatting, holding a core stone in one hand, striking it with a hammer stone in the other. Each strike requires force, accuracy, and the absorption of impact shock through your arms and shoulders. 30 minutes doesn't sound like much until you try it. Your forearms burn, your hands cramp. The repetitive impact stresses your bones, and those bones respond by becoming denser, stronger. The muscle attachment points where your forearm muscles connect to your bones develop pronounced ridges from the constant stress. This is how strength was built, not through targeted exercise. Through the accumulated demands of 10,000 small tasks, each requiring physical effort, each stressing the body in slightly different ways. There's something almost poetic about how children developed in this environment. They weren't protected from physical demands. They were immersed in them from the moment they could walk. Studies show hunter-gatherer children engage in 4 to 6 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity daily. Compare that to modern recommendations of 1 hour daily, which most children don't achieve. Ancient children weren't meeting a recommendation. They were living a life that naturally included constant movement. A 3-year-old helps carry light loads. A 5-year-old climbs trees to gather fruit. A 7-year-old practices with small tools, learning the skills they'll need as adults. Every activity builds strength, coordination, and endurance. Not because anyone designed a child development program, because this is simply what childhood looked like. Their bones show it. Juvenile remains from prehistoric sites reveal robust skeletal development from remarkably young ages. The muscle attachment sites are pronounced. The bone density is high. These children's bodies were responding to mechanical stress the way human bodies evolved to respond by becoming stronger. Modern children's bones tell a different story. Pediatric bone density has been declining for decades across multiple countries. The pattern is consistent. Each generation is slightly weaker than the previous one. The cause isn't mysterious. Reduced physical activity, more screen time, less climbing, running, jumping, less engagement with physical reality. But let's return to our day 15,000 years ago, because we're not done yet. Evening brings more tasks. Firewood must be collected. This means walking to find suitable dead wood, breaking branches, carrying armloads back to camp. You're bending, lifting, carrying. Your back muscles engage. Your grip strength is tested with every load. Preparing hides for clothing or shelter requires hours of scraping with stone tools. You're squatting or sitting, using your arms and shoulders to apply sustained pressure. The motion is repetitive but demanding. Your forearms burn. Your hands develop calluses. Your shoulders grow stronger from the constant resistance. Even social activities involve physical effort. Dancing, which plays important roles in many hunter-gatherer societies, is vigorous and sustained. You're moving your entire body rhythmically for hours. Your cardiovascular system is challenged. Your legs support dynamic movements. Your core stabilizes as you spin and jump. By the time you sleep, you've walked perhaps 15 kilometers. You've carried heavy loads multiple times. You've climbed, dug, scraped, struck, lifted, pulled, and pushed. You've squatted for cumulative hours. You've engaged in sustained cardiovascular effort. You've used your entire body in dozens of different ways, and tomorrow you'll do it again. And the day after that. And the day after that. This is what built those remarkable skeletons we examined earlier. This relentless, varied, unavoidable physical engagement with the world. The Hadza people of Tanzania offer us a living window into this past. They're not frozen in time, they're not primitive throwbacks. They're modern humans who've chosen to maintain a lifestyle that works for them. But studying their daily activities reveals patterns that likely mirror our prehistoric ancestors. Hadza women walk an average of 12 kilometers daily while gathering. They do this while often carrying children and gathered foods. The total weight carried can exceed 50 pounds. They're not training for this. It's simply how food is acquired. Hadza men hunting with bows walk similar distances, but their activity includes more intense bursts. Tracking requires sustained attention and constant movement. Drawing a bow requires significant upper body strength. A Hadza hunting bow has a draw weight of 50 to 70 pounds. Modern hunters often use bows with draw weights of 40 to 50 pounds and consider that demanding. The Hadza aren't superhuman. They're simply living in a way that requires their bodies to be strong. And their bodies respond by being strong. Other traditional societies show similar patterns. The H people of Paraguay, studied extensively by anthropologists, show remarkable physical capabilities. H men can carry loads exceeding 80 pounds through dense forest for hours. H women routinely carry children plus gathered foods totaling 40 to 50 pounds. Among the Ache, even elderly individuals maintain impressive physical capabilities. A study found that Ache people in their 60s and 70s could still climb trees, carry heavy loads, and walk long distances. Compare that to modern developed nations, where physical decline in older age is considered inevitable. But here's what's crucial to understand. These aren't genetic differences. The Hadza, the Ache, the various traditional societies maintaining physically demanding lifestyles aren't biologically different from urban office workers. Put a Hadza infant in New York City, raise them with modern conveniences, and their bones will develop like any other modern human. Put a New York infant with the Hadza, raise them in that physically demanding environment, and their bones will develop the robust characteristics of traditional peoples. Our genes haven't changed significantly in 15,000 years. What's changed is the environment those genes express themselves in. The mechanical forces we expose our bodies to. The demands we place on our skeletal and muscular systems. The human body is remarkably plastic, especially during development. Your bones are constantly remodeling, removing old tissue and laying down new tissue in response to the forces they experience. This process, called Wolff's Law, means your skeleton adapts to match your activity level. If you regularly stress your bones through weight-bearing exercise, they respond by becoming denser. If you don't stress them, they become more graceful, lighter, more efficient for a sedentary lifestyle. This isn't a flaw in the system. It's an elegant adaptation. Why maintain expensive heavy bones if you don't need them? But here's the profound realization. For millions of years, human evolution assumed a certain baseline of physical activity. Our genes, our metabolism, our skeletal structure, all evolved in an environment where intense physical activity wasn't optional. It was simply life. Walk 9 to 15 kilometers daily. Carry heavy loads regularly. Climb, dig, lift, pull, push, squat for cumulative hours. Engage in sustained cardiovascular effort. This wasn't exercise. This was existence. Your body is designed for this. Your cardiovascular system evolved to support sustained effort. Your muscles evolved to handle varied, intense demands. Your bones evolved to bear significant loads. Your joints evolved to move through full ranges of motion regularly. And then, very recently in evolutionary terms, we removed these demands. We built a world where you can live your entire life without walking more than a few hundred meters daily. Where you can avoid carrying anything heavier than a laptop. Where you can sit for 14 hours a day and face no immediate consequences. Your body adapts to this new reality. Because that's what bodies do. They're efficient. They allocate resources based on need. If you don't need strong bones, your body doesn't waste calcium maintaining them. If you don't need cardiovascular endurance, your body doesn't maintain the capillary networks that support it. The result is what we see in modern skeletal remains compared to ancient ones. Lighter bones, less pronounced muscle attachment sites, lower bone density. Not because we're a different species, because we're the same species living in a radically different environment. Think about what that means. The crushing handshake of your ancestor from 10,000 years ago isn't evidence of superior genetics. It's evidence of a life lived in constant physical engagement with reality. Every day, all day, their bodies faced demands that built and maintained remarkable strength. The woman who could overpower modern male athletes wasn't genetically enhanced. She was simply living a life that required her to be strong. And her body, like all human bodies, responded to those requirements. There's a certain humility in this realization. We're not weaker because we're inferior. We're weaker because we've built a world that doesn't require us to be strong. We've traded physical capability for other advantages: climate control, abundant food, protection from predators, longer lifespans, medical care, the ability to specialize in cognitive rather than physical labor. These aren't small advantages, they're transformative. They're why humans dominate the planet, despite being physically weaker than our ancestors. Strength alone doesn't determine survival in the modern world. Intelligence, cooperation, technology, these matter more. But understanding what we've traded helps us see both the costs and benefits clearly. We've gained extraordinary things by building civilization, but we've also lost something fundamental about human physical capability. The kind of strength that was once universal is now rare. The kind of physical engagement with the world that shaped our evolution for millions of years is now optional. And our bodies, efficient machines that they are adapting to this new reality, right now. Today, as you listen to these words, your skeleton is remodeling itself to match your activity level. Your muscles are adjusting their mass to match your demands. Your cardiovascular system is calibrating itself to your exertion patterns. This isn't just about looking at ancient skeletons and marveling at how strong they were. This is about understanding that strength, physical capability, robust bones, these aren't genetic gifts some people have and others don't. They're responses to mechanical demands. They're what human bodies become when they're used the way they evolved to be used. The daily life of ancient humans built their remarkable strength not through any secret or special technique. It built strength through relentless, varied, unavoidable physical engagement with survival. Through walking miles every day, through carrying heavy loads, through squatting for hours, through using their entire bodies as tools for acquiring food, making shelter, and navigating their world. That world is gone. We can't return to it, and most of us wouldn't want to. But understanding it helps us see our own world more clearly, helps us understand what our bodies are designed for and what happens when we remove those design parameters. Because this constant physical engagement didn't just build stronger muscles and denser bones. It fundamentally shaped how ancient bodies functioned at every level: the cardiovascular system, the metabolic system, the endocrine system. Every aspect of human physiology evolved in an environment of intense, varied, daily physical demands. And that's where our journey takes us next. But strength was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The robust bones, the powerful grip, the crushing handshakes, these were merely the most visible manifestations of something far more profound. Ancient humans weren't just stronger, they were physiologically different in ways that would astonish modern physicians. Picture a physician examining one of your ancestors from 10,000 years ago. Not just looking at their skeleton, but running a complete physical, blood work, cardiovascular assessment, metabolic panel, dental examination, the kind of comprehensive health screening we take for granted in modern medicine. The results would be remarkable, in some ways disturbing. Because what this examination would reveal is a human body operating according to fundamentally different parameters than what we consider normal today. Let's start with the cardiovascular system. Your ancestors' resting heart rate would immediately stand out. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer populations and other indigenous groups living traditional lifestyles consistently show resting heart rates 10 to 15 beats per minute lower than Western averages. That's not a trivial difference. That's a heart that's fundamentally more efficient, more adapted to sustained physical exertion. A modern sedentary adult typically has a resting heart rate between 70 and 80 beats per minute. An ancient human, a person living the kind of physically demanding life we've been describing, would likely have a resting heart rate in the mid to low 50s. Elite modern endurance athletes achieve similar numbers, but they achieve them through years of dedicated training. For ancient humans, this was simply baseline. And here's where it gets interesting. That efficient cardiovascular system wasn't just about having a strong heart. It was about having a body adapted to a specific pattern of exertion. Not the steady-state cardio of a modern treadmill. Not the interval training of a CrossFit gym. Something different. Something we're only beginning to understand through research into persistence hunting. The persistence hunting hypothesis suggests that early humans developed a remarkable capability. The ability to run prey animals to exhaustion over distances of 20 to 35 kilometers, sometimes longer. Not through speed. We're not particularly fast as mammals go, but through relentless, sustained pursuit. The mechanism is elegant and brutal. Humans can sweat. Most mammals cannot. On a hot day, a human hunter can maintain a steady jog for hours while their body dumps excess heat through evaporative cooling. A kudu or a gazelle covered in fur can sprint away easily, but after each sprint, the animal must stop to pant, to cool down through respiratory evaporation. The hunter keeps coming. The animal sprints again, stops to cool. The hunter keeps coming. Hour after hour. 20 kilometers. 30. 35. Eventually, the animal's body temperature rises to dangerous levels. It becomes disoriented. Its muscles begin to fail. And the hunter, still sweating, still cooling efficiently, closes the final distance. This isn't speculation. This hunting technique has been documented among the San people of the Kalahari Desert and other groups, and the physiological evidence suggests our ancestors were doing this for hundreds of thousands of years. Maybe longer. Think about what that means for cardiovascular adaptation. This isn't about being able to run a fast 5K. This is about maintaining moderate exertion for hours, about having a cardiovascular system so efficient that you can jog for 30 kilometers in the heat and still have the energy to process your kill and carry meat back to camp. The human body evolved to do this. Your body. Right now, you have the same basic cardiovascular architecture as those persistence hunters, the same capacity for endurance. But in most of us, that capacity lies dormant, never developed, never tested. Modern endurance athletes rediscover these capabilities through training. Ultramarathoners, Ironman competitors. They push their bodies into adaptations that approximate what was once baseline human physiology. But they do it through deliberate, structured training programs. Ancient humans did it by living. Now let's talk about metabolism. Because the cardiovascular system was just one part of a larger metabolic picture that looked radically different from modern norms. Ancient humans didn't eat 3 meals a day. They didn't snack constantly. They didn't have access to refrigeration or food storage that could maintain a steady supply of calories. Instead, they experienced what researchers call feast-famine cycles. Periods of abundance followed by periods of scarcity. Sometimes dramatic scarcity. You make a successful hunt. You feast. You consume as much as you can because you don't know when the next major protein source will come. Then you might go days with minimal food. Some gathered plants, maybe small game, but not the caloric abundance of that successful hunt. This pattern, repeated over and over, created profound metabolic adaptations. The human body became extraordinarily efficient at storing energy during times of plenty and mobilizing those stores during times of scarcity. Your metabolism could shift between fed and fasted states with remarkable flexibility. The evidence suggests something remarkable about this metabolic flexibility. It wasn't just about survival. It appears to have created a kind of metabolic fitness that protected against the diseases we now consider inevitable parts of aging. Analysis of ancient teeth tells a striking story. Before the agricultural revolution, before humans began eating large quantities of grain and refined carbohydrates, Cavities were virtually non-existent. Dental caries, the technical term for cavities, appear in less than 1% of hunter-gatherer teeth. After agriculture, that number jumps to 10, 15, sometimes 20% or more. What changed? Diet, obviously. But more specifically, the constant availability of carbohydrates. Ancient humans ate carbohydrates, fruits, tubers, honey when they could find it, but they didn't eat them constantly. They experienced long periods where their diet was primarily protein and fat, with carbohydrates as an occasional supplement rather than a dietary staple. This pattern of eating, intermittent by necessity rather than by design, appears to have created metabolic conditions that were profoundly protective. When you're not constantly flooding your system with glucose, when your body regularly shifts into fat-burning mode, when your insulin levels aren't perpetually elevated, your metabolism operates differently. Modern research into intermittent fasting is essentially rediscovering what was once the human default. And the results are striking. Improved insulin sensitivity, better blood sugar regulation, reduced inflammation, enhanced cellular repair mechanisms. These aren't new capabilities we're unlocking. These are ancient capabilities we're reactivating by approximating ancient eating patterns. But here's what makes this so fascinating. Ancient humans weren't trying to be healthy. They weren't following a diet plan. They were simply living in an environment where food availability was irregular and physical demands were high. And their bodies, shaped by millions of years of evolution in similar environments, responded with remarkable metabolic efficiency. Compare that to modern metabolism. We eat constantly. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. Our insulin levels rarely drop. Our bodies rarely shift into deep fat-burning mode. We've created an environment of perpetual caloric abundance, and our metabolism, designed for feast-famine cycles, doesn't quite know what to do with it. The result is epidemic levels of metabolic dysfunction. Type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome. These conditions were virtually unknown in ancient populations, not because ancient humans had better genes, because they lived in an environment that kept their metabolism in a state of flexible, adaptive fitness. Now let's talk about grip strength. Because buried in this seemingly simple measurement is a wealth of information about overall physical capability. Grip strength is what researchers call a biomarker. It correlates strongly with overall health, longevity, cardiovascular fitness, and general physical function. When physicians want a quick, reliable measure of someone's physical capability, they often test grip strength. It's predictive in ways that seem almost magical until you understand what it's actually measuring. A strong grip indicates more than just strong hands. It indicates a body that's been regularly engaged in physical work, carrying, climbing, tool use, manual labor, all the activities that build not just hand strength but whole body strength and coordination. And the data on modern grip strength is sobering. Studies from multiple countries show the same pattern. Grip strength has declined roughly 20% in young adults over just the past 30 years. Not 30 generations. 30 years. 20-year-old men in 2025 have significantly weaker grips than 20-year-old men in 1995. The decline in women is similar. This isn't about genetics. This is about behavior, about how we use our bodies, or rather, how we don't. Ancient humans, living the kind of physically demanding lives we've been describing, would have had grip strength that far exceeded modern norms, not because they did specific grip training, because their daily activities required constant use of their hands in forceful, varied ways, making tools, processing food, carrying children, climbing, building shelter, butchering game. Every single one of these activities builds grip strength as a side effect. When your survival depends on manual capability, your hands become remarkably strong. And that grip strength, remember, is a biomarker. It's telling us something about overall physical capability. Those ancient humans with their crushing handshakes weren't just strong in their hands. They were strong everywhere. The grip is just the most easily measured indicator of a body-wide pattern of physical capability. Here's what makes this particularly troubling. We're not just losing strength, we're losing it rapidly. Within a single generation, we've seen a 20% decline. That's not evolutionary change. That's behavioral change happening so fast we can measure it in real time. Your grandparents, on average, had stronger grips than your parents. Your parents had stronger grips than you. And if current trends continue, your children will have weaker grips than you. Each generation slightly less physically capable than the last. Not because of genetic degradation, because of environmental change. Because each generation lives in a world that requires slightly less physical capability than the previous generation. Now let's talk about disease, because the physiological differences between ancient and modern humans show up most starkly when we look at what killed people then versus what kills people now. Atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaque in arteries that leads to heart attacks and strokes. This is one of the leading causes of death in modern populations. For decades, researchers assumed it was simply an inevitable consequence of aging. Your arteries harden. Plaque accumulates. Eventually, something critical gets blocked. But analysis of ancient mummies tells a different story. Yes, atherosclerosis has been found in some ancient remains. It's not exclusively a modern disease, but the rates are dramatically lower than what we see today, and the severity is typically much less pronounced. A study examining mummies from multiple ancient populations found that while some showed evidence of arterial plaque, the extent of atherosclerosis was generally minimal compared to modern populations. These were people who lived into their 50s, 60s, even 70s, and their arteries remained relatively clear. What's the difference? The honest answer is that we're still figuring it out. But the leading candidates are obvious. Diet, physical activity, the absence of chronic stress, the metabolic patterns created by feast-famine cycles. All of these factors appear to protect against the arterial damage we now consider normal. The same pattern appears with other diseases of civilization. Type 2 diabetes, virtually unknown in ancient populations. Obesity, extremely rare. Hypertension, much less common. Certain types of cancer, lower rates. This doesn't mean ancient life was healthier overall. Infant mortality was high. Infectious diseases killed many. Injuries that would be minor today could be fatal. Life expectancy was shorter, though not as short as often claimed. Infant mortality skews the averages dramatically. But the diseases that dominate modern mortality, the chronic conditions that slowly degrade our bodies over decades, these were rare. The evidence suggests that human bodies, living in environments similar to those we evolved in, simply don't develop these conditions at modern rates. Think about what that means. The leading causes of death in the developed world, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, many cancers, these aren't inevitable consequences of being human. They're consequences of being human in a specific kind of environment, an environment radically different from the one that shaped our evolution. Ancient humans were dying of different things: infections, injuries, complications from childbirth, occasionally violence. But their cardiovascular systems remained relatively healthy. Their metabolic systems remained flexible and efficient. Their bodies didn't accumulate the chronic damage we now consider a normal part of aging. The difference wasn't genetic. It was environmental. It was the cumulative effect of daily physical activity, irregular eating patterns, the absence of processed foods, and metabolic demands that kept their bodies in a state of adaptive fitness. Here's where it gets really interesting. We can measure these differences in contemporary populations that still live traditional lifestyles. The Hadza people of Tanzania, the Tsimane people of Bolivia, various groups that maintain hunter-gatherer or subsistence farming lifestyles with high physical demands and minimal processed food. These populations show cardiovascular health profiles that are dramatically different from Western norms. Lower blood pressure, better arterial health, minimal atherosclerosis even in older individuals, resting heart rates that would make cardiologists take notice. The Tsimane in particular have been studied extensively, and their cardiovascular health is remarkable. The lowest rates of coronary artery disease ever recorded in any population. This isn't genetic. Tsimane people who move to cities and adopt modern lifestyles develop cardiovascular disease at rates similar to other urban populations. It's not their genes protecting them, it's their lifestyle, their daily physical activity, their diet, their metabolic patterns. The evidence suggests something both humbling and hopeful. The remarkable physiological fitness of ancient humans, the efficient cardiovascular systems, the metabolic flexibility, the absence of chronic disease, none of this was special. It was simply what human bodies look like when they're used the way they evolved to be used. We're the anomaly, not them. We're living in conditions so far removed from our evolutionary environment that our bodies are struggling to adapt. And the struggle manifests as epidemic levels of chronic disease. But understanding this gives us something valuable. It gives us a map. Not a map back to ancient life. We can't return to that world, and most of us wouldn't want to. But a map to understanding what our bodies need. What kinds of physical activity? What patterns of eating? What environmental conditions allow human physiology to function optimally? The ancient human body wasn't just stronger. It was a complete system operating in remarkable harmony. Cardiovascular fitness supported endurance. Metabolic flexibility protected against disease. Physical demands built and maintained strength. Irregular eating patterns kept metabolic systems sharp and responsive. Every system reinforced every other system. The daily walk of 10 to 15 kilometers built cardiovascular fitness. The feast-famine cycles created metabolic flexibility. The constant physical demands maintained strength and bone density. The absence of chronic caloric excess prevented metabolic dysfunction. This wasn't a body that needed a gym membership or a diet plan. This was a body shaped by the simple requirements of survival. And those requirements, brutal and unforgiving as they often were, created a kind of physical capability that we now struggle to achieve even with dedicated effort. Your ancestor from 10,000 years ago, sitting in that doctor's office, would present a physiological profile that would puzzle modern medicine. Resting heart rate in the low 50s, excellent arterial health, perfect insulin sensitivity, no cavities, grip strength off the charts, bone density that would make an orthopedist envious. The doctor might ask what their secret is, what diet they follow, what exercise program, and your ancestor would look confused, because there is no secret. There's just life, walking, carrying, hunting, gathering, eating when food is available, going without when it's not, using the body as it evolved to be used. That world is gone. We can't recreate it. And the trade-offs we've made, the physical capability we've lost in exchange for the benefits of civilization, those trade-offs have given us extraordinary things. Longer lives on average, protection from the elements, freedom from constant physical danger, the ability to pursue intellectual and creative endeavors rather than spending every day focused on survival. These aren't small gains. They're transformative. They're why humans dominate the planet despite being physically weaker than our ancestors. But understanding what we've traded helps us see both sides of the bargain clearly. We've gained comfort, security, longevity, and intellectual freedom. We've lost physical capability, metabolic health, and a kind of bodily resilience that was once universal. The question isn't whether the trade was worth it. For most of us, it clearly was. The question is whether we can find ways to reclaim some of what was lost while keeping what we've gained. Whether we can live in modern civilization while maintaining bodies that function more like ancient bodies. More efficient, more resilient, more adapted to the physical reality we evolved to inhabit. So if our ancestors were so magnificently adapted to physical life, what changed? What transformed humanity from these robust, physically capable beings into the sedentary, metabolically challenged populations we see today? The answer lies in a revolution that happened roughly 12,000 years ago. A revolution so profound that it fundamentally altered human physiology, human society, and the trajectory of our species. A revolution that gave us civilization and took away our ancient strength. Picture a river valley at dawn, somewhere in the Fertile Crescent. Around 10,000 years ago, the air is cool, rising in gentle, swirling mists from the riverbanks. There are voices in the distance, not the wild, unpredictable shouts of a foraging band, but the measured, rhythmic sounds of people moving in unison. Hands grasp wooden digging sticks and stone sickles. Feet press seeds into the waiting earth, row upon row. This is not the world of the hunt. This is a new world, the world of the first farmers. For countless generations before this moment, human life was defined by movement. All day, every day, bands of hunter-gatherers ranged across forests, grasslands, and river valleys, tracking herds and searching for roots, berries, tubers, honey. No 2 days were quite the same. Some days you might walk 20 kilometers. Some days you'd climb trees or boulders or crawl into caves. The work was diverse, the landscape unpredictable, the demands on body and mind always shifting. But here, something profound has changed. The wild, varied world has narrowed to a plot of land. The body's choreography has become repetitive, almost mechanical. Dig, bend, plant, stand, repeat. Hours pass, muscles burn, but the range of motion is no longer as broad. The body is still working hard, but it's a different kind of work. Here's the thing. For decades, the story of the agricultural revolution was told as a triumph. More food, more people, more progress. Civilization's first great leap. But here's where the story takes a turn. The evidence buried in ancient bones, teeth, and soil tells a more complicated tale. One of progress, yes, but also of loss. Of abundance, but also of weakening. Consider this for a moment. Within just a few generations of settling into agricultural life, human skeletons began to change in ways that are both measurable and haunting. Bones that once bore the robust marks of constant, varied use became lighter, thinner, more fragile. Archaeological sites from Anatolia, the Levant, and the Nile Valley all show the same pattern, a sharp, almost abrupt decrease in average stature. In some sites, skeletons show a drop of 10 to 15% in height within as little as 2 or 3 centuries. That's the difference between an adult male standing 172 centimeters tall and his descendant, just a few generations later, measuring barely 150 centimeters. Think about what that means. This wasn't a slow evolutionary drift. This was a sudden, sweeping transformation, a physical signature of a radical new way of life. The bones don't just tell us about height, they speak too of strength. The cross-sections of long bones, the thickness of the femur and tibia, the ruggedness of muscle attachment sites, all these markers of physical power begin to fade. Early farmers, compared to their forager ancestors, show bones that are more graceful, less robust, less capable of withstanding high mechanical stresses. Why? Because the demands placed on their bodies had changed. The varied, unpredictable strains of climbing, running, throwing, digging, and squatting, the movements that built ancient strength, were replaced by the repetitive, cyclical motions of tilling, planting, and harvesting. The body, always efficient, responds to the stimulus it receives. When the variety vanishes, when the demands become monotonous, the skeleton adapts. It sheds what it no longer needs. Here's what's really fascinating. If you examine the skeletons of early agriculturalists from different regions, from the Levant to the Yangtze, from the Nile to Mesoamerica, you find the same pattern, repeating like a haunting refrain across continents and centuries. A sudden drop in bone density, a narrowing of joint surfaces, a smoothing of the muscle attachment points, the body's adaptation to a world that no longer required the ancient all-purpose strength. But there's more. Archaeologists have uncovered a second, subtler but even more troubling set of changes. The bones of early farmers often show signs of nutritional distress, evidence of bodies starved not for calories but for vital nutrients. Porous lesions on the skull and long bones, called cribra orbitalia and parodic hyperostosis, signal chronic anemia, usually caused by iron or vitamin deficiencies. Bowed or thickened bones, especially in children, reveal the unmistakable signature of rickets, a disease caused by lack of vitamin D or calcium. These diseases, rare in hunter-gatherer populations, become common in the first farming villages. The honest answer is that we don't know all the reasons why. But the pattern is clear. Early agriculture brought more food, but not better food. In fact, in many ways it brought less variety, less nutritional density, less resilience to famine and disease. Consider this. Before agriculture, a typical forager diet might include roots, tubers, berries, nuts, seeds, leafy greens, mushrooms, honey, fish, shellfish, insects, and the meat of dozens of different animals, sometimes over 100 species in a single year. With the advent of farming, that enormous menu collapsed to just a handful of staple crops. Wheat in the Levant, millet and rice in China, maize in Mesoamerica, sorghum in Africa. Suddenly, the daily diet was built around just 2 or 3 foods, eaten in vast quantities. Compare that to the modern supermarket, with its illusion of abundance, but its dependence on a few global crops. The pattern repeats. Here's something that should bother you more than it probably does. The adoption of grain-based diets didn't just shrink bodies and weaken bones, it also ruined teeth. The archaeological record shows a staggering 7-fold increase in tooth decay after the shift to agriculture. Before farming, cavities were rare, almost unknown. After, they became a common affliction, visible in nearly every adult jaw excavated from early Neolithic sites. The reason is straightforward. Grains are rich in carbohydrates that stick to teeth and feed oral bacteria. The result is cavities, abscesses, tooth loss. But there's a deeper story here. Dental health, like bone health, is a window into the body's relationship with its environment. The sudden explosion of dental disease is a signal, a warning, perhaps, about the hidden costs of progress. And yet, from the outside, the agricultural revolution looks like a triumph. Population numbers soared. Villages became towns, towns became cities. The total biomass of humanity on the planet exploded. By 6000 BCE, the world's population may have reached 10 million, a staggering figure compared to the small scattered bands of foragers who came before. But here's what's really puzzling. As bodies shrank and weakened, as nutritional diseases multiplied, as dental health collapsed, the archaeological record shows that people kept farming. They didn't abandon the fields and return to foraging. They pressed onward, building ever larger settlements, ever more complex societies. Why? Why would people accept these obvious physical costs for the sake of agriculture? Some researchers think the answer is simple: calories. Farming, for all its problems, produced more calories per acre than foraging ever could. More mouths could be fed, even if they were fed on a monotonous, less nutritious diet. Others argue that the appeal of farming was social, not nutritional. Farming allowed accumulation of food, of possessions, of power. Land could be owned, inherited, defended. Social hierarchies could be built and maintained. The seeds of inequality, sown alongside the first crops, began to sprout. The answer is probably both. More food, yes, but also more complexity. More mouths to feed, more hands to work, more power to wield. But here's where the story takes a turn again. The rise of agriculture didn't just change the body. It changed the fabric of society itself. For the first time in human history, the bones of the elite and the bones of the commoner begin to differ. Archaeologists digging in ancient cemeteries find that some individuals, buried with jewelry, fine pottery, and ceremonial objects, show fewer signs of nutritional stress, stronger bones, taller stature. Others, often in humbler graves, show the full spectrum of agricultural afflictions: anemia, rickets, stunted growth, worn joints. This is the first clear physical evidence of social inequality. For millions of years, the human body was shaped by the demands of survival, more or less equally. With agriculture, the body becomes a record not just of biology, but of status. The powerful grow taller, stronger, healthier. The powerless shrink. Consider this for a moment. In a Neolithic cemetery at Atalhöyük, in what is now Turkey, excavators found that individuals buried with elaborate grave goods averaged 4 to 5 centimeters taller than those buried in simple pits. Their bones showed fewer signs of repetitive stress and nutritional deficiency. Across the Danube at Lepenski Vir, a similar pattern emerges. The elite are not just socially privileged, but physically privileged as well. What does this mean? It means that for the first time, inequality is written into the body itself. The difference between rich and poor is no longer just a matter of possessions, but of flesh and bone. And this is what makes the agricultural revolution so haunting. It's not just a story of progress. It's a story of trade-offs, profound, complex, and often troubling. Let's look more closely at what daily life was like for those first farmers. Imagine hours spent bent over, planting seeds by hand. The same motion, repeated hundreds of times, day after day. Harvesting with a flint sickle, over and over, until fingers blister and backs ache. Grinding grain with a stone quern, a task that takes several hours each day and leaves telltale grooves in the kneecaps and elbows. The skeletons show this too. Abnormal wear on the lower spine, arthritic changes in the knees and shoulders, compression fractures in the vertebrae. Contrast this with the skeletons of foragers. The joints are healthier, the range of wear more evenly distributed. The variety of movement protected the body from the kind of repetitive stress injuries that plague farmers. Here's something even more remarkable. Some of the earliest evidence for childhood labor comes from these agricultural sites. Children as young as 6 or 7 show skeletal changes associated with grinding grain and carrying heavy loads. Childhood, once a time of learning and exploration, becomes shaped by the demands of repetitive work. The food itself, while abundant, was deeply monotonous. Archaeobotanical evidence from sites across the Near East shows that wild plant and animal species in the diet dropped from over 100 to fewer than a dozen. Meat consumption, especially of wild game, plummeted. Most calories came from just one or two sources: wheat and barley in the Levant, millet in China, maize in the Americas. And the result? Bodies grew smaller, weaker, more vulnerable to disease. But here's what's strange. This transformation happened again and again, independently, all over the world. In China, in Central America, in West Africa, in the Andes, wherever humans adopted agriculture, the same pattern unfolded. A sharp drop in stature, a rise in dental and skeletal disease, a narrowing of dietary variety, and the first appearance of social stratification in the bones. The debate continues because the evidence is ambiguous in some regions. In certain valleys, the decline was less severe, or delayed by centuries. Some populations seem to have mitigated the worst effects by maintaining a mixed economy. Farming, yes, but also hunting, fishing, and gathering. But the overall pattern is strikingly consistent. What was lost? The answer is complicated. On one level, nothing was lost. People survived, populations grew, societies flourished. But on another level, something vanished forever. The universal physical strength of our ancestors. The resilience that came from a varied, nutrient-rich diet. The social equality, at least in terms of physical well-being, that had characterized most of human prehistory. Think about all the knowledge that disappeared as well. The deep, intimate understanding of wild plants and animals. The skills needed to track, to hunt, to gather, to process dozens of different foods. The ability to read a landscape not as a farm, but as a living, breathing ecosystem. Here's the paradox at the heart of the agricultural revolution. More food, but weaker bodies. More people, but less individual resilience. Civilization as we know it, cities, states, writing, science, was built on this trade-off. And yet, it's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine a golden age of foraging and freedom. The truth is more nuanced. Life as a hunter-gatherer was often harsh, unpredictable, precarious. Child mortality was high. Droughts and famines could devastate a band in weeks. Injuries and infections, even minor ones, could be fatal. The move to agriculture was not a mistake. It was a response to real pressures and real opportunities. But it came with consequences. Let's linger for a moment on the archaeological evidence. The bones, the teeth, the chemical signatures preserved in ancient collagen. At the site of Abu Huraira, in modern Syria, researchers found that the transition from foraging to farming coincided with a dramatic decline in stature, from an average of 168 centimeters for men to 157 centimeters within just a few hundred years. Women, too, lost height, dropping from 158 to 148 centimeters. That's an entire head shorter, on average, in less than 5 centuries. Chemical analysis showed rising levels of nitrogen isotopes, signaling a diet increasingly dependent on plant protein and less on animal sources. The bones of the hands and knees developed abnormal ridges and grooves, evidence of repetitive strain from grinding grain. The vertebrae showed compression fractures, a result of heavy loads carried over years. Tooth decay, once a rarity, became nearly universal. In some early Neolithic cemeteries, over 70% of adults show evidence of multiple cavities. In the Americas, the adoption of maize agriculture produced a similar effect, a 7-fold increase in dental caries, with some individuals losing most of their teeth by age 30. Signs of anemia and rickets appear too. In the Nile Valley, up to a third of skeletons from early farming sites show porous lesions on the skull, a telltale marker of chronic iron deficiency. Children's bones curve or thicken, the unmistakable signature of vitamin D deficiency. These afflictions are rare or absent in the skeletons of earlier foragers from the same regions. The honest answer is that we don't know for certain why these nutritional deficiencies became so widespread, so quickly. Some argue that reliance on a few crops made communities vulnerable to failed harvests and soil depletion. Others point to the loss of wild foods rich in micronutrients, or to the increase in infectious disease as people and animals crowded together. What we do know is that the shift to agriculture was not a simple story of progress. It was an experiment, enormous in scale and profound in consequence, whose results we're still living with. Consider the social consequences. With stored food came the possibility of hoarding, of surplus, of wealth. Some families accumulated more than others. The first chiefs and kings emerged. Status was displayed in jewelry, in pottery, in the size and construction of graves. But for the first time, status was also written in the flesh. The bones of the privileged are taller, denser, healthier. The bones of the poor are smaller, more fragile, riddled with disease. In sites like Hierakonpolis in Egypt, the difference is stark. Elites buried with gold and lapis show strong, healthy bones. Ordinary laborers, buried with little ceremony, show stunted growth and signs of chronic malnutrition. This is the moment when inequality becomes embodied, not just abstract. When the body itself becomes a record of social division. The pattern repeats across continents. In the Americas, at the site of Cahokia, the elite are taller and healthier than the commoners. In Neolithic Europe, the grave goods of the rich correlate with stronger bones and fewer signs of stress. The same is true in early China, in West Africa, in South Asia. What makes this so disturbing is the speed with which it happened. Within a few generations, the bodies of the privileged and the bodies of the poor diverged. The revolution that was supposed to lift all boats instead created new hierarchies, new vulnerabilities. And yet it's important not to paint too dark a picture. The agricultural revolution also brought real gains. Larger, more stable populations, the possibility of surplus, of planning for the future. The development of villages, towns, cities, of culture, art, writing. The rise of medicine, science, and technology. There were trade-offs, weaker bodies but more security, less variety but more predictability, shorter stature but longer average lifespans, at least for those who survived childhood. Here's the thing. We're the descendants of those who survived this experiment. Our bodies still carry the marks of that ancient bargain. Most of us are shorter and weaker than our distant ancestors, but we're also more numerous, more interconnected, more capable of building complex societies. What was lost? A kind of physical excellence that was once universal. What was gained? The foundation of civilization itself. As you listen to this, your own body is shaped by choices made thousands of years ago. The foods you eat, the diseases you face, the strengths and vulnerabilities of your bones and teeth, all are echoes of that pivotal moment when humanity exchanged the wild for the domesticated, the varied for the predictable, the strong for the secure. There is a certain melancholy in this realization, but also a sense of wonder. We are the product of an experiment no one designed, an experiment whose results are both everywhere and nowhere, written in the silent language of bone and blood. Some researchers hope we can reclaim some of what was lost, by diversifying our diets, by moving our bodies in more varied ways, by reconnecting with the physical world that shaped us. Others argue that the genie cannot be put back in the bottle, that the trade-offs of civilization are irreversible. The answer is probably somewhere in between. We cannot return to the world of the forager, but we can learn from it. We can remember that the body is not a static object, but a living system, always adapting to the demands we place upon it. And so, as you drift towards sleep, consider this for a moment. The revolution that gave us civilization also took away our ancient strength. The consequences are still unfolding, still shaping our lives in ways we barely understand. But the agricultural revolution was only the beginning. Each subsequent advance in civilization would further distance us from our physical heritage, layering new complexities, new trade-offs, new mysteries to explore. Picture a city at the dawn of the 20th century. The year is 1900. Steam whistles echo through the narrow streets as the first rays of morning sun filter between brick tenements and smokestacks. In the half-light, a tide of men and women moves steadily toward the looming factories, textile mills, steel foundries, slaughterhouses, each one a monument to the promise and peril of a new industrial age. If you could stand at a busy intersection in Manchester or Chicago or Berlin, you would see bodies in almost constant motion. Workers walking miles to reach the factory gates, children darting between horse-drawn carts, housewives hauling buckets of coal up flights of stairs. Even the very poor, even the elderly, even the children, everyone walked. Everyone moved. The world itself demanded it. And yet, beneath this restless motion, something extraordinary and subtle was happening. Something that would change the trajectory of the human body in ways nobody could have predicted. At first glance, the rise of industry seems like it should have made people stronger. Factory labor was grueling. 12 and 14-hour shifts bent over looms and assembly lines, heavy loads lifted and carried, endless hours on one's feet. It was work that broke bodies, that left hands calloused and backs stooped, and yet paradoxically, it was also work that began to weaken the very foundation of physical capability. Here's the thing. Not all movement is created equal. Prior to industrialization, most human labor was varied, unpredictable, and whole body. Farming, carpentry, blacksmithing, even housework, these demanded squatting, lifting, twisting, carrying, walking, climbing, pushing, and pulling. The body responded to this variety by growing strong in many ways at once. Muscles, bones, joints, tendons, all stressed and rebuilt in harmony. But industrial labor was different. Repetitive, mechanical. It asked for the same narrow set of motions, minute after minute, hour after hour. A seamstress at her machine flexed her ankle thousands of times a day, but rarely lifted more than a few ounces. A foundry worker might swing a hammer endlessly with one arm, while the other hung useless at his side. An assembly line hand twisted screws, or packed boxes, or cut cloth, again and again, until the movement was etched into muscle memory, while the rest of the body atrophied from neglect. Think about what that means. The very labor that powered the engines of civilization also began to erode the broad, adaptable strength that had once defined our species. Instead of building the body as a whole, it began to specialize, to narrow, to lock itself into single patterns. Strong hands, but weak backs. Muscular forearms, but fragile knees. The result was a workforce both exhausted and, in many ways, physically diminished. We see the evidence not just in stories, but in numbers. In the late 1800s, industrial towns kept records of worker injuries and illnesses. Rates of repetitive strain injuries, so-called mill hand's shoulder or weaver's cramp, skyrocketed. Workers' compensation claims for back problems, carpal tunnel, and joint pain became commonplace. Skeletal remains from this era show a haunting pattern: erosion of joints and bone in the specific parts of the body used for work, while the rest deteriorated from disuse. And yet, this was only the beginning. The story doesn't end there. Something even more profound was about to happen. With the rise of industry came something humanity had never experienced before: true sedentary work. The office, the desk, the chair. White-collar jobs, clerks, accountants, managers emerged in numbers never seen before. The typewriter, the adding machine, the telephone. Every new invention made it easier to sit, to stay in one place, to move only fingers or wrists for hours at a stretch. By the early 20th century, the average urban worker's day had changed. A farmer in 1800 might walk 10 miles, lift dozens of heavy loads, squat to weed, climb to harvest fruit, chase after livestock. But by 1920, the new office worker might walk only a mile, lift nothing heavier than a ledger, and spend most of the day sitting at a desk. The physical demands of survival had begun to vanish for a growing segment of society. The numbers tell a sobering story. Around 1900, the average adult in industrialized countries took about 18,000 steps per day. That's roughly 8 or 9 miles of walking, not as exercise, but as simple necessity. By the dawn of the 21st century, that number had plummeted to under 5,000 steps per day, a mere 2 miles, often less. For many, even that is an overestimate. Think about that for a moment. In the span of just a few generations, the physical reality of daily life had changed more than in the previous several thousand years. The ancient rhythms of movement, walk, lift, carry, climb, were being erased, replaced by hours of stillness. And perhaps most remarkably, this transformation accelerated with the march of technology. The automobile, the elevator, the escalator. These inventions, so mundane now that we barely notice them, were nothing short of revolutionary. For most of human history, the only way to travel was by foot, or, for the lucky few, on the back of an animal. Stairs were climbed, not ridden. Loads were carried, not wheeled. But by the mid-20th century, the world was being rebuilt for effortless movement. Streets filled with cars. Buildings stretched skyward, their heights made accessible by the silent rise of the elevator. Suburbs sprawled ever farther from city centers, each home connected not by footpaths but by driveways and boulevards. The consequences were both subtle and sweeping. Incidental movement, the kind that once happened as a side effect of living, was quietly eliminated. No more walking to the market. No more carrying groceries up 3 flights. No more climbing hills to reach school or work. Instead, drive, ride, wait. The body, so recently adapted for movement, was now being asked to sit and to keep sitting. By the late 20th century, the pattern had crystallized. The typical office worker now spent an average of 9.3 hours per day sitting. That's more time than most people spend sleeping. Sitting at work, sitting in the car, sitting at home in front of the television. Whole days could pass with the body barely engaged above the waist. Compare that to the world of your great-grandparents. It's a staggering transformation in a single human lifetime. But the story doesn't end there. If industrialization accelerated the decline of physical capability, the digital revolution put it into overdrive. Picture a living room in 1995. A family gathers around a single glowing screen, the television, for an evening's entertainment. Outside, children ride bikes until dusk, climb trees, invent games. But already a new force is gathering. The computer, the internet, the mobile phone. Each one a technological marvel, each one a new invitation to sit, to stare, to turn inward. Fast forward to the present. The average American adult now spends nearly 11 hours per day consuming digital media. Television, computers, smartphones, tablets. Office work has migrated from paper to pixels. Shopping, banking, socializing, even exercise itself can be accomplished from a chair with a few taps of a screen. The consequences are almost unfathomable. The daily step count, once an unremarkable 18,000, now averages less than 5,000 for most adults in industrialized societies. For many, the number is even lower, 2,500, 3,000, sometimes less. The only time some bodies move with intent is on the way to or from a parked car. And the impact is everywhere you look. Muscle mass declines, bone density erodes, metabolic health falters. Cardiovascular fitness, once a universal asset, becomes a rare and fragile thing. But here's what's really haunting. The most profound effects aren't being felt by adults who remember another way of living. They're being written into the bodies of children who have never known anything else. Consider this. Children today have 15% less aerobic fitness than their parents did at the same age. That's not a marginal difference. It's a generational transformation in the capacity of the heart and lungs to deliver oxygen, in the ability to run, to play, to endure. The numbers are striking, and they tell a story that is both sobering and strange. The average American child now spends more than 7 hours a day in front of screens, televisions, computers, tablets, phones. That's more time than many spend sleeping. More time than any previous generation has spent in any single activity unrelated to survival. Physical education, once a daily ritual in schools, has been whittled away. The walk to school has vanished for most, replaced by bus rides or car drop-offs. Free play, the rough-and-tumble movement that built coordination and strength, now competes with video games and social media. The result? A generation that, by every measurable standard, is less physically capable than the one before. Here's something that should bother you more than it probably does. Studies show that modern teenagers have grip strength equivalent to middle-aged adults from the 1980s. Let that settle in. Today's adolescents, at the supposed peak of their physical capacity, match the hand strength of someone 20 or 30 years older just a generation ago. And it's not just grip strength. Rates of childhood obesity have tripled since the 1970s. Incidence of type 2 diabetes, once vanishingly rare in children, has become a public health concern. Even bone fractures are on the rise, as lower activity leads to weaker, less dense skeletons. Some researchers think this is the inevitable result of technology outpacing our biology, that our bodies, shaped by millions of years of movement, simply cannot adapt fast enough to a world built for stillness. Others argue that the problem is more cultural than technological, that with the right incentives and education, physical activity could be restored to its rightful place. There's truth on both sides. The evidence doesn't lie, but the future is not fixed. The answer is complicated. What we do know is that the trajectory is clear. Each wave of technological change has made it easier to do less, to move less, to demand less from our bodies. From the assembly line to the office cubicle, from the driver's seat to the smartphone, the story is one of progressive disengagement from the physical world. And yet, the loss is not just physical. It's not just about muscles and bones, about steps and heartbeats counted on digital wristbands. It's about something deeper. The connection between body and world. The sense of capability that comes from using your body as it was designed to be used. Picture a child in 1950, running through fields, climbing trees, leaping over streams. Picture that same child in 2024 sitting cross-legged on a couch, eyes fixed on a flickering screen, thumbs dancing across glass. The difference is not just in what they do, but in what their bodies become. This is what makes the modern transformation so haunting. It's not the deliberate choice to be weaker, but the gradual, almost invisible erosion of capability. 1,000 small decisions, each reasonable in itself, each part of a larger drift away from physical engagement. The average office worker, sitting for 9.3 hours a day, does not feel weaker. The child who spends 7 hours on screens does not notice the loss of aerobic fitness. It happens quietly, incrementally, written into the fabric of muscle and bone and blood. And perhaps most remarkably, these changes are not limited to any one place, class, or culture. The decline in physical capability is a global phenomenon, following the spread of industrialization and digital technology wherever they go. Japan, once famed for the active commutes of its children walking or biking to school in all weather, now faces rising rates of childhood inactivity and declining grip strength. In Europe, where cycling and walking were once daily necessities, car culture and screen time are erasing old habits, especially among the young. In the developing world, as urbanization accelerates, the same patterns are beginning to emerge. Think about what that means for the future. If each generation is less physically capable than the one before, what happens after another 50 years? Another 100? The honest answer is that we don't know. The debate continues because the evidence is ambiguous, and because the future is always uncertain. But we can say this: the acceleration is unprecedented. Never before in human history have bodies changed so quickly, not because of genetics, but because of the environment we have created for ourselves. The proof is written in the statistics, in the measurements, in the silent language of physiology. The drop from 18,000 to under 5,000 steps per day. The 9.3 hours of sitting that now defines the average workday. The 15% decline in children's aerobic fitness, the equivalence of teenage grip strength to that of middle-aged adults from 40 years ago. Each number, a marker on the trajectory of decline. But here's what's really fascinating. The trajectory is not uniform, and it is not inevitable. There are exceptions, outliers, places where the pattern breaks. There are children who still run, who still climb, who still play. There are adults who walk, who lift, who dance, who refuse to let the world dictate how their bodies will be used. Some researchers point to the Blue Zones communities in Okinawa, Sardinia, Icaria, where movement is still woven into daily life and where physical capability remains high well into old age. Others cite the rise of recreational sports, of running clubs, of fitness movements that seek to reclaim lost strength, lost endurance. But these are islands in a rising sea of stillness. The story doesn't end there, though, because the human body is nothing if not adaptable. The same systems that atrophy in the absence of demand can be rebuilt, sometimes with surprising speed when challenged again. Muscle can be regained. Bone density can be restored, at least in part. Cardiovascular fitness, metabolic health, even grip strength can improve, even after years of decline. This is what makes the story both sobering and hopeful. The mystery is in the malleability. The haunting part is how easily capability is lost. But the remarkable part is how much can still be reclaimed. And yet the cost of inaction accumulates quietly, year after year. The patterns set in childhood's sedentary habits, screen time, a lack of unstructured play, tend to persist into adulthood. The loss of capability once established becomes harder to reverse. What was lost then? Not just strength, not just endurance, but a kind of physical confidence. The knowledge, written into bone and muscle, that you can run, climb, lift, endure. The sense of being at home in your own body, capable of meeting the demands of the world. And what was gained? Comfort, convenience, safety, the ability to work, learn, and communicate without ever leaving your seat. The freedom to choose how and when to move, if at all. The answer is both. The debate is ongoing. The trajectory is not yet fixed, but the momentum is powerful. Some researchers hope that technology itself can be harnessed to reverse the trend. Motion tracking devices, virtual reality exercise, gamified fitness. Others warn that these are mere band-aids, that the real transformation must come from culture, from policy, from a reimagining of what it means to be human in a world built for stillness. We may never know for certain which path will prevail. But here's the thing. The story of physical decline is not just about the past. It is about the present and the future. It is about choices we are making every day, often without thinking, whether to walk or drive, whether to climb or ride, whether to move or to sit. The evidence is sobering, but not deterministic. The mystery remains open. As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. The world your ancestors inhabited required movement. The world you inhabit does not. The body you have is the product of that difference, and the story, for all its losses, is still being written. Now you might be thinking, surely there are exceptions to this pattern? And you'd be right to wonder. Now if you've been paying attention, you might be thinking, aren't there modern people who match or even surpass our ancestors in physical ability? What about Olympic athletes, world-class marathoners, powerlifters, dancers, climbers? It's a fair question. In fact, it's a necessary one. Because if even a small number of modern humans can achieve such extraordinary feats, doesn't that mean the ancient advantage is overstated? Are we just cherry-picking our examples? Here's the thing. Elite athletes are, by definition, exceptions, outliers. The numbers tell a sobering story. Fewer than 0.01% of the global population ever reach anything resembling that level of physical performance. Out of 8 billion people, that's around 800,000. Picture the Olympic Games, the Super Bowl, the Tour de France, all the professional leagues around the world, and you still haven't filled a small city. Even if you gathered every elite athlete alive today into one stadium, the rest of humanity, over 99.99%, would still be outside, looking in. Now here's what's really fascinating. In traditional foraging societies, the baseline is different. The average adult man or woman often matches or even surpasses the grip strength, bone density, and endurance of today's trained amateurs. In some cases, the gap closes only with dedicated training, years of focused effort, and crucially modern nutrition and recovery techniques. But in the ancient world, these capabilities were not rare. They were routine. The everyday physical demands of life meant that most adults carried, walked, climbed, and endured at a level that, today, would require a gym membership and a carefully managed schedule. Think about what that means. The difference isn't just at the extremes. It's in the averages. The entire curve has shifted downward. And while we can celebrate the remarkable achievements of modern athletes, their rarity underscores just how much has changed for the rest of us. But maybe you're wondering about something else. Weren't ancient humans just smaller, shorter, lighter, perhaps more wiry than the average person today? Doesn't that mean their strength was less impressive, proportional to their size? This question gets at something subtle but important. The relationship between size and strength. In modern populations, taller or heavier individuals can often generate more absolute force. But the real story emerges when we look at strength-to-size ratios. Here's where the evidence is compelling. When archaeologists analyze ancient bones, using techniques like cross-sectional geometry, measuring the thickness and distribution of bone tissue, they find that, even after controlling for body size, ancient humans had bones that were significantly stronger than the average person today. In some Upper Paleolithic populations, the femoral strength index is up to 50% higher than in modern sedentary humans. That's not a small margin. That's a different category. Picture this. A forager woman in East Africa, weighing perhaps 110 pounds, carrying a child and a bundle of gathered roots over 5 miles of uneven ground. Her grip strength, her bone density, her aerobic capacity, they rival those of today's recreational athletes regardless of stature. The pattern repeats in indigenous Australians, Hadza, Inuit, Aceh. It's not about being big, it's about being adapted. Now, let's address a more haunting objection. Didn't most ancient humans die young? Isn't the story of pre-modern life one of suffering, disease, and early death? The average life expectancy in the Paleolithic, or even the Neolithic, was often calculated at around 30 or 35 years. Doesn't that undermine any claim of physical superiority? But here's where it gets really interesting. Those low averages are shaped by something called infant mortality. In most ancient and traditional societies, a staggering percentage of children, sometimes 30%, 40%, even 50%, did not survive past age 5. This tragic reality drags down the average, making life seem brutally short. However, if a person survived childhood, their prospects changed dramatically. Skeletal evidence from forager and early farming populations shows many adults living into their 60s and even 70s. Tooth wear, degenerative joint disease, healed fractures, all markers of long, physically active lives. The answer is complicated. Survival was never guaranteed. But the ones who made it through the gauntlet of childhood often enjoyed decades of robust health. Compare that to the modern world. Today, life expectancy is much higher, but a significant portion of those years may be lived with chronic disease, frailty, or disability. The ancient pattern is different. Fewer made it, but those who did were often physically capable well into old age. Some listeners might still wonder, are we just romanticizing the past? Painting a golden age of strength and health that never truly existed? It's a haunting question, and one that deserves humility. Here's the honest answer. Life in the ancient world was hard. Hunger, injury, infection, violence, these were ever-present dangers. There's no point in pretending otherwise. The archaeological record is littered with evidence of trauma, malnutrition, and loss. But here's what's remarkable. Even in the face of these hardships, the physical adaptations remain. When anthropologists studied traditional societies in the 20th century, groups like the Hadza of Tanzania, the Kung of the Kalahari, the Tarahumara of Mexico, they found the same patterns. High mobility, strong bones, low rates of cardiovascular disease, metabolic flexibility. The pattern holds, even in recent memory. The debate continues, of course. Some researchers argue that civilization brought benefits so profound, written language, art, medicine, law, that any decline in physical strength is a small price to pay. Others mourn what was lost, the universal capacity to run, climb, carry, endure. Both perspectives are valid. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. Think about that for a moment. To acknowledge the suffering and loss of the past is not to deny the remarkable physical capacity our ancestors possessed. And to admire their strength is not to ignore the cost at which it was purchased. So, are there exceptions? Of course. Are there nuances, mysteries, unresolved debates? Absolutely. But the weight of evidence bone by bone, mile by mile, generation by generation, makes the central pattern clear. For most of human history, the average person was far more physically capable than the average person today. Not because of better genes or some lost secret, but because life demanded it. The world was their gym. With these nuances in mind, what does all of this mean for us tonight, in our modern world? So here we are at the quiet edge of a long and winding story. A story measured in bones and footprints, in the silent architecture of muscle and tendon, in the slow unfolding of human possibility across tens of thousands of years. The journey we've traced tonight is not just about decline or loss, nor is it about nostalgia for a vanished world. It is, at its core, about connection, about inheritance, about the astonishing fact that the bodies we inhabit, your body tonight, are the living archive of everything that came before. Think about what that means. Under your skin, millions of years of adaptation are still at work. The same bones that carried ancient runners across the savannah, the same ligaments that let our ancestors climb for fruit or wood or safety, the same heart and lungs that fueled migrations out of Africa into deserts, over mountains, across ice and ocean, all of it is still here, crystallized in DNA, preserved in the architecture of your skeleton, waiting in the silent potential of muscle fibers and nerves. Here's the thing. The story of human strength is not over. It has simply changed direction. The evidence is clear and compelling. Our bodies retain the genetic capacity for remarkable adaptation. In study after study, even modest increases in physical activity, just 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, can partially reverse the long, slow decline in bone density that plagues much of the modern world. In one experiment, adults in their 70s and 80s regained measurable muscle mass and strength after just 12 weeks of resistance training. Other researchers have found that even after years of sedentary life, the body responds to new challenges. bone cells activate, muscles grow, blood vessels multiply. What does this mean? The ancient strength of our ancestors is not lost. It is dormant, waiting. The legacy is not erased by centuries of comfort or convenience. It exists as potential, a kind of quiet promise written into the code of who we are. But here's what's really fascinating. Understanding this history helps us understand ourselves, not just as individuals, but as a species. The trade-offs that shaped our ancestors' bodies are still shaping our lives. The choices that led from wild landscapes to cities, from foraging to farming to industry to digital worlds, are inscribed in every cell and every habit. We are living, breathing experiments in adaptation, still negotiating the balance between security and risk, comfort and challenge, still carrying the questions of what was gained and what was lost. Some might wonder, should we try to return to the ways of the past? Should we seek to reclaim the lost strength, the lost ways of moving, the lost connection to the land? The answer is complicated. The world that created our ancestors' bodies no longer exists. The forests have been cleared, the plains are tamed, the rhythms of life have changed beyond recognition. But the lesson is not about reversal. It is about remembrance, about honoring the heritage that lives within us, and about making conscious choices in light of that knowledge. Think about that for a moment. The bones in your hands, your legs, your back, they are not just anatomical structures. They are the products of a million tiny victories over hardship, over hunger, over ice and heat, over danger and time. They are a testament to survival, to ingenuity, to endurance. That is your heritage too. The strength of your ancestors is not a distant memory. It is a living part of you, woven into every gesture, every breath, every heartbeat. And yet the paradox remains. Civilization has brought profound gifts, safety, abundance, art, knowledge. It has allowed us to build cities, to write poetry, to send our voices across oceans at the speed of light, but it has also built walls between us and the wild world that shaped us. It has made movement optional and stillness the default. The gains are real. The losses are real too. But this is what makes the story so remarkable. We are the inheritors of an extraordinary physical heritage, and we live at a moment when we can choose, perhaps for the first time in history, how much of that heritage to honor and how much to transform. The story does not demand that we abandon the comforts of civilization. It simply invites us to remember where we came from and to appreciate the astonishing legacy written into our bodies. So tonight, as you rest, let yourself feel that connection. Imagine the long line of ancestors behind you, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 generations, stretching back into the shadows of prehistory. Imagine the world they moved through, the demands they faced, the strength and adaptability they carried, and know that their story is still alive, in you. Whether you're listening from the quiet forests of Scandinavia, where reindeer herders once walked, from the sun-baked valleys of the Levant, where wheat and barley first grew, from the savannas of Africa, where the earliest humans ran and hunted and dreamed, from the mountains of the Andes, the riverbanks of China, the broad plains of North America, no matter where you are, the same legacy lives within you. We are a community, joined not only by curiosity, but by the deep threads of shared history and shared possibility. If you found comfort or companionship in this journey, know that you are not alone. There are others, scattered across continents and time zones, listening, wondering, drifting towards sleep with the same questions. Let these mysteries follow you into the quiet hours. Let the legacy of your ancestors be a gentle comfort, not a burden. Sleep well.